Welcome to the Cinema of Ideas, the Independent Cinema Office's virtual screen, a forum for conversations about cinema, film culture, and film heritage. My name is Catharine, and I'm the director of the ICO. Just in case some of you don't know about the work we do at the ICO, we are the UK's national body in support of independent cinemas of all forms. Our activities include programming, training, and events, and you can find out more about us at www.independentcinemaoffice.org.uk. A special welcome to audiences from our partner cinemas across the UK and audiences from our ICO networks. Thank you to our funder for this project, the BFI, awarding funds from the National Lottery. A few housekeeping things to mention before we start. This event is being live captioned. Thank you to Trish, who's our captioner this evening. And it's also been recorded and will be available to view on our YouTube channel in due course. You can find an archive of Cinema of Ideas previous talks there too. Thank you also to my colleague Dan, who is doing the tech. The discussion will last about 40 to 45 minutes with time left at the end for comments and questions. But if you want to get involved in the conversation before that, please do feel free to post comments in the chat and Dan will pass them on to me. And we will finish promptly tonight at 6:30. So those of you who are braving the heat, we're really grateful for you to join us this evening. Our next Cinema of Ideas event will be Life in the Woods, curated by our very own Sami Abdel Razak, a season which aims to serve as an illustration of the beauty which can be found in nature, an example of a more sustainable way of life, and a warning of what we stand to lose if we don't act now to stop the climate crisis. So very apposite on the hottest day of the year. Featuring a screening of the endlessly fascinating cult documentary, The Moon and the Sledgehammer, alongside De Natura, a short film from Lucille Ajlilovic, and a live discussion with Troy Vertees and Drew Prendergast, authors of the recently published Half-Earth Socialism, about their vision for an environmentally stable future. And the event will be facilitated by No Planet B Film Club. The films will be streaming on our site 9th and 16th of September, and the panel will take place on Tuesday, the 13th of September. You can book tickets via the Cinema of Ideas website, which is www.cinemaafideas.org.uk. I'm now delighted to welcome artist, filmmaker, writer, and curator Sarah Wood to the Cinema of Ideas. She works primarily with the found object, particularly the still and moving image, as an act of reclamation and reinterrogation. Recent works include Beautiful Flowers and How to Grow Them for John Hansard Gallery's Derek Jarman's Modern Nature exhibition, and Here Is Elsewhere for Kettle's Yard in Cambridge. She also, as you will know, has made an amazing film for us for our platform, Projectionism, which hopefully you'll have had the chance to see. So thank you so much, Sarah, for the beautiful film. And also there's a wonderful blog that we have up on the site at the moment that she is a conversation that Sarah had with our colleague Selena Robertson about the making of the film. So I'll try not to repeat everything that you and Selena talked about because that'll be really boring, obviously. But thank you very much for making your film and giving it to us. Like a really wonderful, and it's such a kind of act of collaboration and collectivism that I think, you know, is really interesting because it's sort of, obviously you and Selena are, you founded Club des Femmes, which is a kind of feminist collective, filmmaking collective, and Projectionism itself is sort of like this amazing film that, you know, it's a kind of act of collectivism itself, isn't it? Which is really, feels really, really nice. So I was wondering if you could start by just telling us, where did the idea come from? Where did you start with it?
Okay, back in time when COVID, we're all over COVID now, it's just, you know, that's all over. But, you know, when we were actually locked down because of COVID safely in our houses, I was quite curious about the fact that when we hadn't got the usual kind of reactions that we get from navigating the usual world, so we didn't have all the stresses and the sort of impetus to respond very quickly in the world, you could sort of hear how your brain works all the time, and you know, you could see how it flicked into memory, flicked to places just to try and locate itself in the world. I don't know if it's just me that I was completely mad, but in that first sort of very quiet part of lockdown, I thought, this is kind of amazing. We're getting to see how our brains are working, you know, how we reach out to people, how we think, how we use our imagination and our memory and our instincts far beyond all the sort of daily reactive stuff that we got used to doing. And so thinking about that, I started to, obviously, like all of us, I miss people and I miss places. And then I started to think, I'm really missing art galleries and cinemas. I'm so missing them. I'm missing the experience of being in them. And I don't quite know what to do about that. And in the spirit of, I think it's Maya Angelou who said, we always remember how we feel when something profound touches us rather than we actually remember really what it was or what was happening. I thought, I want to note down whenever something comes into my mind that's one of those experiences, those shared cultural experiences, I want to note it now to see what surfaces in the quiet of lockdown. And then Selena and I was talking like we do a lot. I mean, we're in different cities, we couldn't see each other. And so I said, why don't we both do it? Why don't we both sort of, while we're apart, just try and note down what it is that we're remembering about cinema? So we noted down about 3 things, because of course all those projects like sourdough bread making and everything lasted for about a week, but then it was an idea that didn't go away. So when you thought up the wonderful idea for bringing back the cinema of ideas as a holding cultural space, I thought, well, let's open this up. Let's ask people what they are missing about cinema, what they remember about cinema, what they feel about cinema, and see if people will share their own memories. And so we, through the ICM, put out the open call, and then the rest is history, really. And I realise now it's actually a very personal thing to do, because I think so many people love cinema that it's very vulnerable to say, this is my most profound moment that I had. This is the thing that I really felt. This is the thing I love because of this reason. I think it was a very moving thing to do, and something that we kind of needed to do. We needed to know where we were and what we valued when we were all apart. So I think that's where it started. It was a sort of memory game when I thought we would never be back in the world again, and a sort of love letter to cinema when I was missing it so much, and missing the experience of seeing films in an audience rather than watching them on a tiny screen, which I think we got rather too used to in lockdown. So that was it. That's where it started.
And can I ask you a little bit then about because about the kind of collective nature of it, about making a film that is based or uses as kind of source material the memories of lots and lots of different people. So I'm assuming that you haven't made a film like that, quite like that before, where you're, they're not people that they're not people that you know in that kind of way, and they're not necessarily, obviously you use archive a lot in your work, but this was people's memories, the kind of, it's about the past, but it's also very much about the present, about the kind of now. So how was that for you in terms of working? Did that kind of, did they all come in and did you think, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? This is not the way I'm used to making a film? Or was it just like brilliant in terms of?
I think it was brilliant. I've tried this little game on people before, but it sounds like it. And I actually realise now how difficult it is to say to someone cold, tell me your memory, because of course our memories don't come by command, they come as they surface on their own terms. So I had made a film before about the Palestinian Film Archive, which was an archive of political films that was lost in the in 1982 when Israel invaded Beirut. And I asked people then to talk about their memories. But again, people didn't really so much talk about the films when they remembered. They talked about the making or the process or where they were or what was happening. So it was very much about them being in the memory. And I suppose then, that was about 10 years ago now, maybe longer, I was quite surprised about that. I thought, surely we remember a beautiful moment in a film. Surely we do. Of course we don't. It's the human thing. It's the person sitting next to us eating crisps annoyingly all the way through moonlight that we'll always remember. It's that kind of thing. So I don't know. So this was a bit more of a wide call because I wasn't so precise. So I just said to anybody who worked in cinema, so filmmakers, cinema workers, film critics, anybody who is in the world of making cinema work in whatever way that happens. I just put the call out to anybody to answer. And it was telling what people liked. I just think it's funny if we wanted to do a sort of cultural assessment of the psychology of the British people. The film that came out number one as the film that the majority of us had seen as our first film was Bambi. So if you want to torture British people, you just go, what happens to the mother? It's like this horrible thing. It's awful. So it's funny. It's like it was a wonderful sort of litmus test of culture, and it was a sort of, I don't know, it was a kind of wonderful thing, the revelation of it, and to feel the enthusiasm people had for the memories of it. So actually I found it very heartening to receive the answers, and surprising. You didn't know what people would love and what sticks in people's minds.
Oh, that's beautiful. And did you find it hard? Because obviously there's a sort of responsibility, isn't there, about, people are giving you their memories. Like, as you said, it's a very kind of personal thing, quite an emotional thing, and it can make you feel vulnerable to kind of share. Because on the one hand, some of those people, like filmmakers, critics, may work in film professionally, but what they're then sharing with you is something that is much more personal, that is not necessarily a professional memory. It's more about their kind of emotion, themselves. There's more about. Did you feel that kind of responsibility of how to represent other people's memories? Was there a sense in which you thought, okay, you've written this, but I don't know whether necessarily I will use everything that you have said to me, or I need to think how I use what you have said in a way that is kind of kind and respectful, all those different things.
Totally, because I sort of knew from the beginning that what I would do is make a script out of it. So I'd anonymise the contributions, and I wouldn't quote anybody verbatim. And because a lot of people, I'm saying this a bit badly, but a lot of people did pick the same film. So, for instance, I love The Wizard of Oz. My friend Lucy also picked The Wizard of Oz. So you could sort of amalgamate if I wanted to. Our stories about seeing The Wizard of Oz for the first time, so it was looking for sort of commonality between the stories. That was the main aim of it. So even though all the stories stand, and they were, some people just put in their favourite film. They just named their film. They didn't need to go any further. So what I did with the people who narrated a little bit more was that I looked for the common themes between them and what people shared really across the film. So I was trying to make something of a communal voice out of the separate stories. I hope it was the right thing to do. It's a difficult question really, because you want to represent everybody. Of course, it's only a short film, so I hope that I touched on it. But I tried to sort of cover the sense of different people, everybody's story, and be as inclusive as possible. I don't think very few people had that single story told in its entirety. I think that was quite rare. The exception is actually Selena, who got our certification to be a warning on it, because her memory was of watching Jaws in a cinema as a very small child. She was far too young to see it, and so she literally hid under the seat for the whole way of the film going on. She could just hear this horrific noise up above her, and she was like, "Oh, this is terrifying," and crying. And then at the end, she was like, "Oh, yeah, but I survived it." I was like, so it was a great story, and I loved that, because it felt like we'd all been going through COVID, and it was all a nightmare, but somehow we'd come out the other side a bit bruised, and maybe we'd get to go to the cinema again. They survived it. So I put that story in almost as Selena told me, and and that's funny, because when it went to the BBFC to be certificated, they were like, "There's a sense of threat in the film," and I was like, "That's it. Jaws is terrifying. Even thinking about it is terrifying." So yeah, it's a difficult thing to select things. So I had to be careful and think, not to misrepresent anybody or change people's stories too much.
Yeah. I almost think it's more scary to watch Jaws without the picture, almost. Do you know what I mean? Like screaming and
imagining it happened.
Yeah, exactly.
There were 3D. I remember watching the 3D one, but being the only person who hadn't got 3D glasses. Everyone else was screaming and reeling, and I was just like, "What?"
I can't see anything.
I don't understand.
And then you've obviously divided the film up into into a particular structure, with kind of the cinema of possibility, or I wondered how you came up with that structure, and how you thought what those different sections would be.
Now you're asking.
Come out of the memories that come out of the communality of things.
I think
I really like that, so I just was interested in why you did that.
I think it was because a lot of people talked about the practicalities of going to the cinema, and the sort of a lot of people did, and that's basically what I thought I'd look for in the archive footage, was all the rituals, the repetition. So why we like sitting in a particular seat, why we what kind of things we like eating, whether we don't like people eating next to us, all that sort of stuff, the kind of things that were very practical about going to the cinema. And a lot of people's memories focused on that, the things they loved about the particular seat, the cost of the ticket, the way, a cinema that still has 35mm projection, all those sort of very practical, real things. So I knew that was very important, but I also could feel the sort of metaphysical pull of what cinema means, and the sort of dreaminess it represented. So I wanted to yeah, to give a space to what was concrete and real about it, and then to pull into something that was larger and more open. So I think that's really how I organised it. And basically, again, I think it's organised according to the themes, really. I suppose sort of arising out of the different responses we got. So I think that's the answer to that.
But it's really interesting, because I think one of the things about cinema, particularly, post-COVID, people are not going to the cinema so much, or, people, there's always a kind of constant anxiety about how cinema will fare. Everybody was watching everything on a screen, people watch streaming platforms, and to try and talk about what it is that makes cinema so completely transformational. You know what I mean? So I think that's what's really also really interesting about the film, that you are trying to convey some of that within the film, which is kind of really hard to articulate. You know what I mean? So people, we all know that it is different, and sometimes we think maybe what's different is the communality, that we're there together, but obviously we can go to the cinema by ourselves and be in an empty screen, and it's still different. It's
Yeah.
not the same. So I wondered if you could talk a bit more about that.
Oh, that's funny. It makes me laugh. Usually in a heat wave, I'm heading to London to edit a film with my friend Lucy. I seem to have the timing that no, my final stage of any edit means I go to Lucy's studio and it's really hot. So I'm sort of missing her now. Anyway, but the thought of that is when I arrive with an edit, and I usually work with her at the sort of last few days, we'll sit down and we'll sit back, and then there's something about handing over something that I've been making on a computer up here, and we sit back, we watch it on the screen, and the minute we do that, you can see where things need space, where an image is doing all the work. You don't need the voice or the sound to be doing it. There's something about that moment of sitting, well, I suppose it's sort of even symbolically sitting with Lucy and an audience, where you start to let cinema really work on you. It's the scale of it and I suppose the sort of seductive nature of the image. It will work on you anyway. Like sometimes when I'm making things in the old days, I would hurry to cinema to see anything, whatever, even the advert, because suddenly just seeing something at scale and seeing how something works and is beautiful at scale opens your imagination in a different way. And there's nothing that can replace that. We can watch things on a small screen and we get the narrative and we get sense of things and you get a sense of drama, but we don't get something about the sort of way we're lulled into it. There's a French philosopher who said that he thought that when early cinema started, all the experimentation was in cinema before sound came, and we all just were like, oh, this is so brilliant. I mean, you can watch things and understand things from the image on the screen. And he said, as soon as you got voice, then you sort of were like a baby. You got told what to think as well. And I think that sort of baby sense of what we get from now, the narrative cinema that we're used to, is something that's sort of, it's very beguiling and it's very seductive. And you can't get it anywhere else. I don't know how far away or close to your own little screen you could sit to get there. So for me, it's about what can happen at scale, that sort of wonderful spaciousness that you can get from cinema. You're looking into a world in the dark, and you can just let that unfold like you would sort of when you're kind of trying to describe a dream. It's the same sort of feeling to me, that's the core of it. And I think it's a great thinking space. That's why it's great. This is called the cinema of ideas. It's a space where you're sort of, because it's so big and it's happening to you at scale, your brain kind of wanders around it. It's sort of, it's sort of, you're participating in some way. You're not taking in every detail. It's working on you on a scale that's quite complicated, but it's working all at the same time. I went and saw at the Cambridge Film Festival, Tony Jones had got a print, I think, of an experimental 70mm print of Vertigo. And it had the print, but it had a separate soundtrack. So I'm not very technical, but basically the soundtrack had to run on a separate unit. And so Vertigo started this amazing wide print of it, and then something happened, so the sound cut. But we didn't care. The whole audience sat there and we could watch the whole of Vertigo, and it was so beautiful and perfect and mysterious like it is, but without the sound. Imagine taking Bernard Herrmann away, taking the text away. It was just beautiful to see it. It worked entirely as a dream kind of silent film. So I think that's what cinema is. It's when it's that thing that lulls us in and we're very primed to accept it. I think we can't get it anywhere else.
No, that's definitely true. Could you talk a little bit about working with the archive maybe on this film, and then I'll get you, because obviously you've done lots and lots of work with archives, but there's some lovely, 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 beautiful images in this film, of which, you know, are sort of, again, really transformative, you know, in terms of, because they match so beautifully with your narrative. And it's almost as though you have shot them for, you know what I mean? But obviously you didn't shoot them, they came from an archive. But I mean, on the one hand, it's like it's an amazing example of what artists and filmmakers, you know, how amazing archives are, and how creative you can be with that work, and how you can kind of repurpose it. So it's just an amazing example of that anyway. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you work with the archive, and how you set about sort of doing the research of looking for images, or how you do that.
Well, this film is quite unusual, really, because I knew that the East Anglian Film Archive had this wonderful collection of films about cinema, and I think I wonder if I should have checked this beforehand, but I think that they had an archivist there for a long time called David Cleveland, and he himself made films about cinemas as they were being closed, and he recorded things and made sure that everything was sort of kept as much as possible. Sorry, I'm not explaining it very well. But I think he also made sure that the films about cinema came into that particular collection. And so it has this wonderful collection of films. And I was very lucky because I sort of knew that from researching a different project. So I went to them and asked them if I could use any of the footage. And they had, Melissa Beacon, who works there now as security, had just put together this list which itemised all the different films that contain moments of cinema in them. And so, so basically, it was perfect timing. And then, of course, in usual terms, it would have been very, very expensive to take all the clips that I did from the films in the archive. But they were kind enough to do this as a collaborative process. So for this year, all the clips are licensed for free, basically, which enabled the project to happen. But it's usually, I wouldn't work like this. Usually, I would look for the image first of all and find sort of mysterious things that intrigued me, and then I would write something that responded to that. But in this instance, I worked a bit more like a documentary filmmaker because I knew what we were going to do with the call out, and so I was looking for very particular types of image. And because this really was about British cinema going, like the things that were easily available online tended to be American, and I wanted it to be about, well, what characterises British cinema going. So yeah, it's a kind of perfect match-up working with them. I was very lucky. I also did have some footage of my own, which I've gotten. So I used to. My favourite job, apart from working at the ICO, was working at the Art Cinema in Cambridge, and it was my favourite job. I was a ticket tearer. I loved it. 10 years, I saw every film ever. It was just brilliant. Sometimes more than enough. And I was like, I really loved it. But when the cinema closed, sort of 1999, I got terribly upset, and I went and I spent the whole 24 hours filming everything that happened in the building. I filmed the toilets and the cellar and the electricity box. I was mad. So I kind of forgotten what have I recorded this for. So when we were making this, I thought, oh, okay, so let's look at that footage again. And of course, it was a gift. I went around the cinema recording people buying their tickets and putting up posters and doing all the things. It was very sweet to find it all and see people that lots of friends and people I love very much, and even the people who I recognise from audiences, just seeing glimpses of them again. It was a beautiful thing. So yeah, for the first time, I consulted the Sarah Wood archive of archive this. It was good.
Was she very collaborative, or was she worried about how you would?
Oh, terrible! Yes, contracts to be signed. Oh, it's moving. I really moving, and actually really sad because one of my big friends from the cinema had died not of COVID, but in the first few weeks of COVID, and there she was in the film, and it was wonderful to feel her, and to, in a way that was just sort of every day, because there we were in the cinema making the film, and there she was in the background trying to photobomb the picture all the time. It was really moving. That's the sort of life that I think you can find in archive material that if you set out to go and shoot a cinema for a particular project, you wouldn't get that. You wouldn't get that sort of feeling of what it's like to work in a building. The people shuffling past in the background going to make their cups of tea in a particular place, and the lady selling chocolates, all the things that are very bright in the film. You wouldn't sort of get that feeling of it if you had set out to try and make a film about cinema. There it was, sort of hidden in what had been recorded. So it was, it's very moving. Lots of.
I think that goes back to what you're saying about, when people remembered it, that they're the things that they remember. So the things that you showed are actually, that all contributes to the sort of unknowable that you can't really, that you find it hard to articulate and tell someone
Yeah,
that what is it that makes it so different? What is it that makes it so special? And
yeah,
but it does make it really special.
yeah,
That's the thing, isn't it? It's the combination of all of those things together
yeah.
that make it really different. Um, I wondered if I want to get you to talk, because I know that you have worked with lots of other archives, and you also work with the Stanley Kubrick archive. So I wondered if we could get you to talk a little bit about that, and are things you're allowed to talk about? Because I mean, that's just sounded like the most amazing job ever. So
Oh, it was a dream. Yeah, in fact, I think they probably had to have a restraining order to evict me from that residency. I loved it so much. It was funny. It's LCC, and it's the Screen Archive, and it actually has. I was excited by all of it. Really, it has Thorold Dickinson's archive, it has Stanley Kubrick's archive, and it has some of John Schlesinger's archive, plus lots of other amazing things that are to do with design and photography. So they gave me the residency to be in there, and I went thinking, what will touch on all these people? And sort of the first box I opened in the Kubrick archive, I was like down the rabbit hole of Kubrickness. Partly because he's such, I mean, I love archives and working with archive material. And of course, he was someone who archived everything, all his pre-production, all his research, all his notes, all the tests for things, all the different materials he's gone into. All of it is kind of held in this amazing archive that was in his house after he died. I mean, he had barns and barns of material all kept and preserved, not really for posterity, for use, for going back into touching on in other films. So it was kind of amazing, really, to feel that energy, to feel someone who was so dedicated to research and to the finding the really true thing by testing and testing when he was making each of the films. And it was amazing to me, because I suppose that's what you might expect from a experimental filmmaker, to be entirely personal and sort of rummaging through their own material all the time. But he was someone who was doing it at such huge scale, and he was requiring all the people who worked on the films to come up with solutions all the time and work them through, and no, that's not right. That's right. It was a kind of it was sort of wonderful to be near someone so brilliant and so perfectionist and so ambitious for cinema. I began to think, has anybody been that ambitious since? I was like, this is incredible. So I loved being in the archive. It was wonderful. I loved it. I loved it. I loved all the weird, mad things that anyone would find. I mean, there were people in there doing very devoted research about particular films, and writing academic books about it. And I just loved the fact I could sit and read a scrapbook from The Shining that they had made, which had all this stories, sort of some made up, some real, of terrible atrocities that had happened through this century. It literally sits on Jack Nicholson's desk. I think maybe he looks at it at one point, but someone has sat and put this incredible scrapbook together, and I could sit there and read it. And I'm thinking, this just is created to have a aura on the screen. It has all this complication and intensity in it, and it's just there as a kind of symbolic object that radiates this kind of layers of meaning. I loved it. I loved being there. I wasn't before. I wasn't a huge Stanley Kubrick fan. I think now I'm just like, well, that's really impressive. That's being very close to a brilliant artist. So I love that. I don't know how long have we got. I could tell you lots of things that I loved in the archive.
I was going to say what I love that thing you just said about the ambition of cinema, because I'm just thinking about the cinema. So the cinema of ideas, for those of you who don't know, that started originally, and Sarah was involved then, and so was Selena. I mean, I read Lindsay Anderson diaries and started thinking about that time and people working about that time, and some of that was very much about people's ambition for film and what it could be, and particularly in Britain at a particular time, which I think is kind of some of what you're talking about as well, from his work, from Kubrick's work at that time. And it's quite interesting, this idea of people working in what would perceive to be a kind of commercial cinema, but have these huge ambitions for what cinema could be, and thinking about it in a way that's sort of really productive and actually it's sort of very meaningful, you know, how whoever you are, you don't necessarily have to be the person making the film, or you don't have to be part of the film industry, but actually like really ambitious for your audiences and the people involved, which I think is really is the thing that you notice. And maybe that's because it doesn't happen that often. Always.
It's that ingenuity which you sort of love when you watch like Charlie Chaplin films and he's thinking for the first time, oh, I'm going to do this really ingenious thing, and I'm going to put it on screen for the first time. And I suppose we get complacent and assume that there's certain tropes and things have to fit into place in a certain way. But with somebody like Kubrick, they're never going to go for that. They're going to be inventive all along. I remember looking at the material about Full Metal Jacket because I was curious, because I know that Derek Jarman was filming. What would he be filming? I think he's filming the Smiths videos that he made back to Kubrick filming Full Metal Jacket at Beckton Gas Works, as it was. So basically, Kubrick's blowing up things behind this wall, and Derek Jarman's filming in front of it. So I kind of like this moment of crossover. But then when I look at the material about Full Metal Jacket, I mean, Kubrick had thought how to make a really authentic Vietnam, and he was importing trees and plants that were exactly in flower at the right time of year for when it was, there was no expense spared. And when the film came out, people they were like, well, this doesn't look like Vietnam. And it did look like Vietnam, it just didn't look like Rambo, which had come out in the same year, which was all jungle and, how we all know what Rambo looks like. And so it's a sort of terrible thing. There was Kubrick looking for a degree of authenticity, perfectionist degree of authenticity, which wasn't really speaking the convention of whatever had happened in cinema in the last little while. So I felt really moved by that sort of painstaking attention to trying to make things work. But in the spirit of ambition, the other person who I loved in the archive was Thorold Dickinson, and he there's a note, an early note. So when he was just setting out to make films, he was employed to go to Spain during the Spanish Civil War and film in the Republic. And he was sent by a left cinema organisation in London, and off he went to Spain. And there's a letter in the archive which is basically, it makes you realise how dangerous it was. It's sort of like, off you go and get the night train to Paris. And in Paris, someone may meet you and give you some money and some film stock. If they can't make it, you cross over the border on this train and you arrive in Madrid, and then someone else hopefully will give you some film stock and get. And you think, there's Thorold Dickinson. He hasn't really made a film before, and he's setting out with the hope of being able to film what he will find in Spain. And so, in the nature of archives, there's that, and then there's sort of what happened afterwards. So that in the boxes of things from when he returned are all these tiny pamphlets and magazines and things he's collected while he's been in Spain, which basically a testimony to the Republic and things like how to set up a library in each village, how to set up a school. And he's kept all that. He's just sort of kept that evidence of that moment when something really progressive was happening that he witnessed. And realised how dangerous it was for him to go, how sort of mad it was that he just set out. And then that's what he saw, and that's what he brought back in those tiny details. So I found that very moving, and the fact that he went on and he was obviously in charge of the film societies in the UK and the setting up of the Film Society organisation. And then after the war, he went to the United Nations and set up kind of film societies for the world. It was like, I don't know, I found that very moving, that this sort of tentative start, like we all do when you set out making a film, you're like, will it work, won't it work? And he just made the journey and survived. And then he brought back this detail about these possibilities that he'd seen in that tiny window in Spain before Franco won, and he brought that back, and he made something of it, and he made something in Britain, and then eventually, perhaps for the whole world in a way, to think that it was possible to connect through cinema. So I really love that as well. There's something about his sort of quiet ambition for cinema, and then there's Kubrick's huge ambition for vision on screen, and it was brilliant to be close to them both. Really brilliant. And I didn't know very much about either of them particularly before I started, apart from knowing the films. So I didn't know anything biographical or historical, and so it was interesting to go in innocently in a way to see what was there. The best thing that I did was it was the anniversary of 2001, and they wanted the archive wanted something sort of commemorative to happen, and so of course I love odd things that you find in the archive, and Kubrick had asked people to go and record chimpanzees so that he could invent the sort of noises that the Neanderthals make at the beginning of 2001 before they throw the bone in the air. And he'd got tape after tape, all these reel-to-reel tapes in a box. I don't know if anyone had ever listened to them. It was all this noise. And so I thought, oh, that seems very intriguing. So they digitized it for me, and then I sent it out and got lots of different people to try and translate what they thought the chimps were saying to try and make this thing. So it was very good fun. It was very playful. There's a funny book that I made in the end that's got all the stuff in it. Different people responded to it, appearing in different ways. But it's but it was things like that. It was very, very moving to see that level of concentration and that attention to detail.
What were the chimps saying?
I sort of knew, but then I thought, did I know? Because the person who recorded them said, "Oh, they're angry," and then they're laughing or something. I can't remember now what they were doing. But you think, well, that's what he thought they were doing. Who knows what the chimps were doing?
They planted the eggs. They're plotting.
They're plotting. It's hot enough now. It's time. So that was very moving. It's wonderful. There are not very many women in the Kubrick archive, as you can imagine. But
there was a surprise.
But there was Joy Cuff, who's a wonderful model maker. She made Thunderbirds, which I love very much, but she made the moonscape models for 2001, and all her notebooks are in there. And they're the thing possibly I love the most, because they're all her tests. How would you make something look like the surface of the moon? So it's like mixed plaster with a bit of granite and the glitter, and it's a wonderful sort of cookery book of all these tests they did. And she obviously was very fond of Kubrick, and she said she thought he was very shy, so people think he's difficult, but she thought he actually couldn't really say out loud what he wanted directly. So you would take to him your moonscape and go, da-da, and he'd be like, no, and then you'd be like, oh, and then you go away and you come back with something else. And she said that really got the best of people, because they tried to second guess it. They wanted to be part of it, but they were trying to get his vision. And so he, because of shyness, maybe that's what she thought, he was enabling people to really be their best, to go out and find chimps and record them to make a model of the moon. And so I really loved that. It was very human and very and takes you back to really why we all love cinema, the sort of mad, ludicrous project that it is. It's insane, really, when you think about it.
I guess as a filmmaker as well, making a film is not an easy, for anyone, is not really an easy endeavor, is it? It's not like anyone just knocks them off and it's quite straightforward. Do you know what I mean? It's hard. It's hard, isn't it?
And it's interesting. It's difficult. One of the reasons it's difficult is the trusting other people, and so that's what was quite interesting about Kubrick, is that he had to trust other people, and at the same time, was he really, really, he knew what he wanted. It's like having someone go, I know what I want to do. But he 2001 is a case in point, because he invented that gravity machine so they could film it, and they built it. And of course, the film studios would be wigging out about budgets, but of course, it made so much money that it would have paid for itself in essence. Oh no, I could still be in there now. Certainly today, I would like to be in there in its perfect, cool temperature. But it was wonderful, and I've a few of the outcomes have finished, but one of them was just about to finish at the start of COVID, so it's sort of next on my book, really. I have to go back to
looking forward to that then. Can I ask you a little bit with Projectionism about the sort of sound edit, the soundscape that you built? Because I think it's really phenomenal, that all the kind of, and I know again that is something that you like to spend time on and that you think about a lot. Again, it's one of your, like the archives, that you love sound, you love all of those different the texture and the kind of density of sort of different voices. And again, with this film, it's only 12 minutes long, but the soundscape is perfect and so complex and complicated, and adds so much to, it's like another voice, another set of understanding within the film. So I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about how you created that.
I suppose, well, I actually think a lot works in, it's a sort of stupid thing to say, but a lot works in sound to make the feeling of a film work, for me anyway, because I tend to like to have a sort of essay voice that sounds very much like you can trust it. I think a lot of the questions and the complexity come through the sound, the things that you're sort of hearing slightly out of your range of awareness. And I think with this, it was quite interesting, because it was a question about how loud or not those things should be, and where we were getting thought from, when we could enter into a moment when we were sort of getting that chance to sit back and look at cinema, when we were sort of feeling it when we went into a sound space. I'm not saying this very well, but I've just been, it's funny because I've just been working all day today in the heat with headphones on doing a sound edit, and I feel a bit like, ooh. I feel like I can still hear it in my ears, so it's just a bit weird. But I think that's my thing. It's true. I think I don't know if I'm being a bit weird, but I think we hear a lot of voice all at the same time. And it's a bit like I was saying about when COVID times were very quiet and suddenly quite surprising things were coming to the surface. I think in the voice level of the film, you can sort of bring the things that are slightly unconscious that need to come through to the surface, kind of supporting what's being said. I like to do that in sound. Or, I don't know all that's sticking in my mind is that I use tiny moments out of films. Don't tell anybody. And I have tiny bits of soundtrack that pop in from things like Psycho and, in fact, Vertigo, I think, or North by Northwest. Just tiny moments that people touched on in their memories. And I think that's it, because they're sort of phrases that we hear out of films, maybe even more than images in a way, that stay with us and that really meant something to us. I suppose when you look at an image, it's quite hard to hold its full significance, but you hear just moments of something that's articulated, and that is possibly the thing that you can hold on to longer. I'm trying to think of an example in the film, but yeah, in fact, it is. I think it is North by. Is it North by Northwest when they're looking they're looking at a tree and they're looking at how old the tree is, and there's this is like film quiz.
It is, isn't it, when they're in that hotel in the desert and they're outside
and they go and they're looking at something on the tree, and it's very tragic because she goes, yeah, it is North by Northwest, because she says, oh yes, this is going to be here for forever, and it's been here all through time, but my life's very insignificant basically in this, and she's giving the clue that she's not all she sees. But I think it's that sort of thing where you have this sense of something and it came to the surface just in a phrase, just in something in a film. So that's what I'm trying to do with sound. And of course I collect sound from all over the place. The BBC have a wonderful almost free sound archive. They've released a lot of their sound recordings, which is wonderful. And there's a wonderful site called Free Sound, where amazing people record sound all around the world, and then most of it's on their Creative Commons. Well, it's all free to use, but it's all about different forms of license, and it's just wonderful. I actually could spend quite a long time, and maybe I'm very weird, but I could listen to different places and different spaces in sound, and I think it's very evocative. You don't quite know where something is, but even things like the sound of a police siren in a different place or an ambulance would just take you sort of imaginatively to a different landscape. So yes, that's my secret territory that I work in to show people. I love doing it for myself. I do love doing that. It's like composing. It's like being a mad composer of sound.
when it works, though, doesn't it? I think you're right. It's the kind of oral memory is like maybe more sort of sharp or significant or evocative than maybe your visual memory. And even, like the voices, like you said, you took small clips from films that people talked about. Just the sound of somebody's voice is like when takes you back to that moment in a way that perhaps, like you say, that an image wouldn't. But it's just sort of
sound quality, the way things are recorded, in enunciation and things. So you're absolutely right. If you heard Cary Grant, that's a very different sound to, I don't know, George Clooney speaking now, beautiful as they both are. But just the texture of their voices and their enunciation shows the 50 years between their primes. So it's sort of, it does a lot of work. It shows you the layered nature of film. Sort of archaeological layers of it are all there in the sound.
I'm thinking maybe we've got a question in the chat. Maybe I should. So if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat, and I will read them. Well, hopefully, I'll try and read them.
It might be get off melting.
You've got one from Alan Siegler. Hello, Alan. Yeah, it says, beautiful film, Sarah, a really tender, loving piece. Were there any memories from your interviewees that you couldn't fit into the final edit but loved? And the same with any archive footage that you found but didn't fit. And also another question, which is anything that you found or surprised you whilst working on the film. So I guess the first bit is, were there any memories or archive footage that you would have liked to put in but that you couldn't? And the second question is anything that you found that surprised you while you were making it?
it's quite hard. People did share really beautiful things, and they were lovely stories in themselves. And a different project would be to hear those. And we touched on it because we produced a pamphlet that had some of the stories. It wasn't like that they were the best stories or the most interesting necessarily. They were just things that sort of worked together. So yes, it was a sort of unfolding, endless story, endless box of possibilities. Now I'm thinking about it, I remember one story, and I'm going to missay this, so I hope maybe I shouldn't name the person who gave it, but there was a story of a well-known filmmaker who talked about going to the cinema for the first time and going to see Werner Herzog's Gary Wrath of God, and he of course went with his college, and he sat down in the seat, and film started, and he just was like, that has blown my mind, that has changed everything, that is it, my life's changed. And that he said in the story that he always goes, when the film's on, he always goes approximately to the same seat, he always has the same distance to the screen. And a lot of people talked about that, liking a particular seat and sort of their own sort of psychological space that they needed. They wanted row C, or they wanted the back row, or they wanted the middle of the front row, or whatever. So people shared that, which somehow I found really moving. It was hard to because there were other stories that were sort of similar to that, so I kind of amalgamated it a bit, which was a shame in a way, so everything got boiled down to something. But those were it was a horrible choice, leaving some things out and putting other things in. And other people shared really moving things about very personal things about how cinema had changed them, and in fact, well, I don't know, I can't really repeat them because a lot of people would share them and then say, actually, I want to keep that private, which was moving. Something came out that they wanted to say, that they remembered, and then they were like, oh, I don't know if I kind of want that in a film, but it was a very sweet project. So and as for the footage, what surprised me? I mean, I had my surprise, like I said, about seeing the art cinema. Alan and I worked later on together at the Arts Picture House in Cambridge, but the art cinema was big in my heart, and so I had lots of surprises in there, and it was funny to know it exactly, but not to know it and to feel it. So I think all of that was quite a shock, and a very loving shock. It was like being with someone that you love terribly and that you know very well, and suddenly you were just in step again and you were walking along, and I think that was the moving thing about that, to be able to look into footage and see that. And then to see the sort of gestures that I'd recorded quite sort of blankly, those repeated across the footage that was coming from the East Anglian Film Archive. So different people sort of loving the same things about cinema, loving the same sort of details. And that really sort of spoke the communality that I'd invited in the voices, but had sort of happened anyway when you looked at images and what people have in common. So I think those were I think that's it. Something else will surprise me in a minute. I don't know.
I think it's really interesting as well, because you start off making a film that's about everybody else's memories and other people's experiences, and you're just putting them together, and then you start watching footage that actually is about your life and your memories, and that probably must have taken you by surprise. You're kind of thinking your framework is a sort of different framework. You're in a different paradigm, and then suddenly there's like your own kind of life. It sort of takes
I'm very good at that. I mean, not to start this being psychoanalysis 101, but when I was a child, I got all the children in my street to run away from home. I said, we're all going to meet at the treehouse at 6 o'clock in the morning. We're all going to run away from home. I woke up to my mother shouting at me. Outside was a crowd of angry mothers going, your daughter made everyone run away from home. Where is she? I was snoring in bed, of course. But it makes me laugh, because I think at some point I have to take responsibility for the thing I set in motion. So with this project, I asked everybody to come up with these complicated memories, and I was doing all this stuff. And then at some point I thought, I have to kind of fess up a bit about what I love and what this hooking me into this. So it was in the spirit of not having the angry mothers at the door shouting at me, I must be honest really about what cinema's meant to me. It meant so much, that cinema, the art cinema in Cambridge. I worked there for 10 years and I loved it so much. It was basically my film school education, because I saw so many great films, and so many of my friends come from that time, that I'm just like, how could I just ignore it? So it was wonderful to have that footage there and be able to say it. It's not to say that I haven't loved other cinemas, but that was my first love.
And that's the thing about cinema, isn't it? Particularly people who end up working in film, is most people, which is what the film is about, will have a place or a cinema that it was really meaningful to them. And if you ask them, where did this start? Where, obviously maybe your parents took you to see Bambi, or they might have taken, you might have watched things on the telly or whatever, but where did your interest in something slightly different happen? And everybody will tell you about a place that is special to them. Nobody will say, oh, well, I went, when I was in my 20s, I went and watched all these different, they will go this place and this time and this age, and that will be their place. And we all have that place. We all have that we can remember. And it's in our mind, it turns into something else, doesn't it? Then they get knocked down, or they turn into something else, or they're a pub or whatever. But for us, they are so significant. Like your first house that you lived in or something.
Yeah, exactly. Your mind impacts it. Yeah, you know where you are when all the mothers knock on the door. Yeah. It's something I was thinking about that because I suppose I really loved cinema as I was teenage, and I'm so old that it was the 1980s, and a lot of cinemas were changing at that time and becoming multiplexes, and it was cinema business was changing, and that's when Ian Breakwell wrote his, I think it was sort of late 80s, early 90s, he wrote the book Sing in the Dark, which is a wonderful collection of cinema memories. And he basically then was trying to say, well, let's commemorate now all the things we loved, all the people, all the things that happened in cinemas. And so that was a big inspiration. Celine and I talk about it in the blog for both of us. It's something that we have really liked. It's very, very witty book. I hope it's published. Let's make a campaign to get it published if it's not published, because it should be out there. It's a great book about cinema by a wonderful artist, Ian Breakwell.
Yeah, it is really wonderful. Oh, so Joanna says, mine's a cinema I now work in. Oh, now that is nuts. we don't always hear that, but that is lovely. Selena has sent us a question. Hello, Selena. Hello. She says, hello, Sarah. Can you talk more about the booklet you designed to accompany the film, as that is a beautiful companion piece?
Oh, Selena and I are the queens of documentation.
On the zine, you love a zine, don't you?
Love a zine, a magazine, postcard, we are on it. And actually, it's quite sad because Selena and I were talking, because we thought when we started Club des Femmes, we set out very capriciously, like we would just do something and we would just be casual about it. And of course, there's nothing really survives apart from the memories, which now in the age of, clever young people who record everything and have everything, sort of on social media and Instagrams, all of that is apparent, whereas our legacy is sort of somewhere in Kubrick land, out in space somewhere. So it is really important, I think, to try and make something that's also material. And because this was a film about cinemas and the very concrete experience of going to the cinema, hopefully that pamphlet could be printed out and be material in the real world. And also a bit an answer to Al's question, it was a way of trying to give voice to some of the stories that sort of didn't really get their full narrative in the film, or were sort of hinted at and didn't get their full voice. And so it was a way to show everybody the kind of range of stories that people were sharing, which, it was a taster in a way. Literally we had hundreds of responses. I don't know how many it was in the end, but it was wonderful to read them through, and then to try and think. I was like, I must talk about the Little Mermaid. So many people love the Little Mermaid. I
love the Little Mermaid.
So many people. I was like, how can I bring all this together? Bambi forever. But it was, and sometimes it was this the idiosyncratic memories, or the idiosyncratic films that I suppose stood out because they were unusual. So a lot of those were collected in the pamphlet. So I hope does that answer the question?
Yeah, it definitely.
I don't know. I can't see. Yeah. No, I love the fact that there's something that's a legacy, a memory, a sort of consolidation of a memory project. It all feels like it's playing games with the old idea of archivization. So you're archiving a project that was based in the archive. So that pamphlet is my attempt at doing that. I don't know. We should print some, and then they'll be in the world.
No, definitely. We will. Well, cinemas can show it after we played it on the platform.
Yes.
Print it out if they wanted to. Rosalind says, no question, just wanted to share how much I love the film. Brought up so many memories of cinemas.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's what we wanted, because I just wanted it to start encouraging other people to have memories. And people have sent me, people have just written and gone, oh, but that reminded me. So it is a wonderful generative thing. I think we have to. I mean, it's sad, isn't it? But we can't take for granted anything that was in the that we maybe did take for granted. We can't take for granted that cinemas are always going to be there, or galleries, or theatres. You know, especially with this hateful government, they positively don't like culture. So we have to think what we love and sort of argue for what we love. And so this was my bid to try and make people feel exactly like you do, that it reminds you of what you love about cinema. It sort of consolidates that love, and it makes you know that other people love it as well, that we're not alone just sort of randomly feeling things, that there's a cinema movement. I don't know that this country is very good at thinking about cinema culture, you know, cinema in a kind of Trotter way. We're not very good at being serious about it, and it's a shame because it'll easily be pushed into something that's something people buy, but it isn't. It's so central to our culture and so central to the way we think and imagine ourselves that I think we have to stand up for it a little bit. So this was my bid to try and start the standing up process. I don't know.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, you're right. I think often people there's this idea that that it's why do you need these cinemas? Why do you need independent cinemas? Why do you need these places? There's plenty, and everybody's watching the same films. But actually, they are such sites of spaces, cultural spaces, community spaces. Sort of, they can be really radical. They can be so community orientated. They can, that thing about going alone. That they can make. They are say I think you say that in the film, that there's a sort of language that people use that's very sort of modern or contemporary, but actually people they are kind of safe spaces, and for lots of us they're places that you can go if you're somewhere that you don't know anybody, if you're alone. There are things there are sort of times where actually they have real meaning for you in a way that other things that people is not really recognized that often.
Yeah, and a lot of the memories, I mean, I think I sort of condensed this into some probably a line, but a lot of people's memories were about coming to, being in quite remote where they grew up, and then being in a cinema and feeling for the first time, oh, this is what it's like to be among my people, that I'm sharing this. Selena and I were talking the other day about, I heard the mermaid singing, and I can remember I heard the mermaid singing for the first time. And it ends, and it's got a very downtrodden heroine who triumphs, and the whole audience, when I saw it, I think it was Edinburgh, I can't remember which festival I saw it, and they leapt to their feet and they were cheering, and I was like, oh, that can happen in the cinema. We all spontaneously clapped together, and so the idea that we were clapping an image was so extraordinary to me, and so spoke what the joy of being in a cinema watching a film with people who kind of share a vision is wonderful. I mean, it's the best part of it. But I think that we can't underestimate exactly that. Safe space has become a bit of a sort of shorthand for something, but I think it is about that. It's about preserving all the possibilities for what the imagination can do, and the fact that you can go in and something mechanistic is happening, and it all feels very sort of neutral and modern, but at the same time it's unleashing all the fantasies and imaginations that come out of all the art forms. It's kind of thrilling because you can be as neutral as you like going in, but you're going to get something that's like a window opening. So
Oh no, it's wonderful. So thank you very much for making your beautiful film about it.
No, thank you. It's been wonderful. It's been really great and really lovely to work with everybody and to feel it go online. And so exciting to hear that people are enjoying watching it. Share it.
There's lots of people are watching it, and you can watch it till the end of July on the platform. So thank you very much to Sarah for joining us this evening. It's been like a lovely conversation, and do go on our mailing list if you're not already on it. And as I said, we're having a break in August, and then we're coming back in September. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thanks again to Sarah for the film and for this conversation.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye everybody.
Bye.